Hello, my name is Maria King, and I'll be the keynote speaker on the second day of Lilac 2023 on the topic of accessibility. What does it mean for libraries in education? Firstly, I'll share a little bit about myself and my work in the area of accessibility. I currently work as a subject librarian at Edinburgh Napier University, and I previously worked at two other English universities in similar roles. I first got involved with accessibility work through initially a personal interest, as I'm neurodivergent myself. And then through making connections via liaison meetings and other training sessions, I was invited to work with a colleague in the learning and teaching department at one of my previous institutions to develop and deliver a workshop for academic staff on how to improve your teaching practices for neurodivergent students. And I was able to bring my lived experience to this training. This work is carried on at my current institution, where I've delivered training sessions for both library staff and more widely across the institution around library specific accessibility support, wider teaching and learning support for neurodivergent students, and around digital accessibility. My current team sits under information services, so we have a remit for support for both information and digital literacy. Some of you may have attended the Lilac Conference parallel session I delivered last year on improving your teaching practice for neurodivergent students. I'd like to thank the Lilac Conference organisers for inviting me back to be a keynote speaker on this topic of accessibility, particularly Heather Lincoln, who's been my main contact in the conference team so far. I'm looking forward to meeting you all in Cambridge in April and answering the questions that come out of this keynote video. Accessibility is a very wide topic, and I could probably make a very long video on it, but I'll spare you the video fatigue, and I'll be touching on what I feel are some of the key areas for education and information professionals. A lot of this will come from my personal work settings and perspectives, but if your job role or workplace settings are different to mine, I would still hope that most of these considerations are transferable for your individual circumstances. I'll be posing a lot of this in the form of questions for you to consider and reflect on in the context of your own role, team, or workplace, and considerations you may want to think about in order to improve your accessibility practices. Firstly, it's important to think about the purpose of accessibility work. So, why is it important to us and what do we want to achieve? Whilst there are legal accessibility requirements, I would hope that most people are not only motivated by these as a reason for making their services and products accessible. Within educational settings, there should also be an ethical or moral motivation to ensure equity of access to information and equity of learning opportunities for all. Also, the consideration of the accessibility needs of both staff and students. I feel that sometimes the needs of staff are not taken into account to the same level that student needs are. Thinking about this, do you know if there are any accessibility policies within your workplace, either as a whole or within your direct team or department? Do these cover both students/customers and staff support, or just one of these groups? And if you do have any policies, are these meaningful documents that actually impact working practices? In terms of roles and responsibilities, what disability or accessibility support teams exist within your workplace with specific remits for different areas of support? Do you know where to go to find out where specific responsibilities lie? Do you clearly know the real role and remit of your team when it comes to accessibility, or of you as an individual? Do you currently provide any accessibility guidance in your role? So, for example, incorporating information on this into your teaching or training of others. So, in my role, I would explain accessibility features within ebook platforms, for example. If you wanted to initiate some accessibility work within your own workplace, do you know who you can approach to potentially work and collaborate with? And finally, what accessibility training is provided at your place of work? Is this built into new staff induction processes at all? Is it tailored to specific teams or even specific tasks or systems connected to individual roles? Secondly, the importance of understanding the impacts that disability or lack of accessibility could have on someone. Users could need adjustments based on a number of different reasons, and some of the main ones are detailed on the screen at the moment. It's also important to note that the adjustments that somebody needs aren't necessarily static or constant. Some could change on different days. They could be impacted by external reasons, or potentially by things like stress levels as well. There's also different levels of impact, so you could have immediate impacts such as not being able to access a specific resource or service. The secondary impact of this could therefore be not receiving the same information or support as other students. And then the long-term impacts on someone's understanding, learning, and potentially degree outcomes. Something you may be aware of at the moment due to media coverage is the topic of diagnosis. Diagnosis rates for neurodivergence in particular have increased recently, leading to some media speculation around overdiagnosis. But I would disagree with this and feel that we are just getting better at recognition and diagnosis. There's previously been a lot of bias around diagnosis, particularly for minority groups, and it can still be difficult for a lot of people to get a diagnosis for a variety of reasons and biases. For example, there's always been more men diagnosed autistic than women, which led to the belief that it's therefore more common or prevalent in men. However, this ratio is decreasing, suggesting this isn't actually the case. Rates do not equal prevalence, they're more like evidence of diagnostic bias. There will also be people who choose not to seek a formal diagnosis from a healthcare professional. Again, for a variety of reasons, but this could include the cost of getting a diagnosis as an adult, wait lists being off putting, cultural differences and biases, not wanting to go through the stress of having your life examined in great detail by healthcare professionals, almost judged, if you will, not wanting to partake in the system that uses the medical model of disability, or not wanting a label due to stigma, because there's definitely still a stigma around some diagnosis. Diagnostic barriers, bias, and choice of not seeking a formal diagnosis all mean that formal diagnostic statistics will always be lower than the real statistics. This can sometimes lead to problems, though, with getting accommodations and reasonable adjustments put into place, because universities sometimes only provide certain accommodations if someone has a formal diagnosis. In some areas of the country, waiting lists are longer than degree programs take to complete. So, how ethical or moral is this to deny someone support they need to succeed because of factors completely out of their own control? In terms of teaching and learning, there's an approach called universal design for learning, which takes the approach that there will always be diversity across groups of learners, and in order to achieve equity of learning, we need to provide flexibility. It recognises that there isn't always one best way for everyone, and therefore learners need choices and options in order to succeed with their learning. Some examples using a UDL approach could be providing information in a variety of different formats, so text, media, different types of documents. Providing teaching or training slides in advance as well in an editable document format so that attendees can make any changes to the document in advance in order to understand and engage with it, such as fonts, sizes, background colours, all things that could prevent someone understanding the content without these adaptations. Flexibility and engagement during teaching sessions as well. So verbally asking a question, using a chat box, using a digital learning tool. You could also have multiple communication methods for support, so phone, email, live chat, video calls, in person. Potentially things like definitions and glossaries for terms could also be helpful, and also incorporating opportunities for putting new learning into practice and reflection. In terms of supporting students, thinking about your students or customers or service users, what information do you know about them in relation to any accessibility needs or reasonable adjustments? Are you able to find this information out, or would this be very difficult for you to do? Are you really being given the information you need to best support all the people you come into contact with through your job role? Another key consideration that ties into UDL is the idea of proactive versus reactive support. UDL builds in proactive support, meaning we are reducing the likelihood that someone would need to take the time to request further reductions and adjustments. Both the emotional labour and admin time involved in getting reasonable adjustments put into place can be very draining and stressful. And in the context of university students, can put certain students at a disadvantage if they're having to spend a lot of their time contacting staff, requesting access to resources, equipment, information, etc., if it isn't already provided in a format that's accessible to them. This can also mean that their learning time in comparison to other students is being reduced, leading to inequities in access to learning opportunities. Generally, UDL is a good starting point for designing teaching and learning support, but you may find that even with this approach, there will be some people that have individual accommodations that will need further personal adjustments. People with the same diagnosis may not need the same adjustments, and something that works for one person might not work for another. Universal design is also a phrase that can be used more widely to reflect an approach of designing services and spaces to be able to be used by all. Thinking about when initiatives, services, products, spaces are developed, designed, or changed in your workplace, is accessibility considered and built into this process? How are the viewpoints of disabled people captured? Are they expected to do this for free, or are they compensated for their contributions in any way? Within libraries, for example, when you're considering subscriptions for new digital resources or platforms or products, do you take the accessibility of these into consideration when making a decision of whether to take a subscription or not? How do you go about doing this, if so? Do you ask the supplier about the accessibility? Do you check this yourself? In terms of digital accessibility in more detail, within your own workplace, is your own digital content accessible? And digital content can refer to web pages, but also media resources and social media. Are you responsible for creating digital content yourself? Really, anyone who creates digital content should ensure that what they're creating is accessible. Do you have any web accessibility statements in your workplace? So these should be created for different platforms, such as the university website, LibGuides, blogs, etc. And they're also needed for third-party platforms such as e-resources, repository, VLEs, the library catalogue, online teaching tools, etc. How are you checking the accessibility of any content you're creating then? And this also ties into the initial point I made around roles and responsibilities, around who is expected to check this. And if people who are designing digital content are being provided with the correct knowledge and training to both design for accessibility and also recognize and rectify accessibility issues. And really, accessibility should be built into any sort of product, service, or digital content design right from the start rather than an afterthought. Thank you very much for listening to my video. I hope this has posed some really interesting questions for you to think about and consider and reflect on, and hopefully some interesting questions will come out of that for you to ask in advance, and we can meet on the day in Cambridge, and hopefully I'll be able to answer those for you.